Well, good afternoon, everyone. By my clock, it says 1:30, so we will go ahead and get started with our webinar for this afternoon on Coaching Families in Early Intervention, Part 2, Strategies. Our speakers for today will also be the speakers that we had a couple weeks ago. Hedda, Meadan, and Chung will be presenting on our coaching strategies for today. This is a picture of me, so you know the face behind the voice. And just as any other webinar, if you're new to webinars, you will get an email from us at the conclusion of today's webinar that will include a link to a survey. And once you complete that survey, you will receive a certificate of attendance. And as always, if you've joined as a group, that you will need to each have logged on or each received an email to get a unique survey for credit. Any questions, you can put those in the chat. Most of you have figured out how to work the chat box, but if you haven't, there is a box on the lower left-hand corner that does include a spot where you can type in, and you just hit enter, and anything you chat in there will come up for everyone to see. This is a great place to type in any questions that you may have, any comments or suggestions or strategies, or say hi to someone you haven't seen in a while. So please feel free to use this. We will be offering question breaks throughout the session, but it does work. If you have a question, you go ahead and type it in, and we will address it when we come to one of those breaks, rather than waiting for the break in order to type your question. So please use your chat box. We've also got a couple other tools that you can use. If you will notice, under your name, there's 4 little boxes. The first box is an emoticon icon, so you can click that and tell everybody how you're feeling today. The second one we won't use. The third one is a hand raise box, so you can click on that and it'll show a hand raise. So if you have an issue that you need someone to address, or a question, although we'd prefer that you use the chat box for your question, but you know, you can use your raise hand. Our presenters may also just ask a general question of everyone on the webinar, and you can use that to raise your hand. The fourth box is our polling function box, which we will use here in just a moment. Sometimes it will have a checkbox in it, and sometimes it will have a letter in it. And you will use that fourth box whenever we have any polls that come up. All right, I think with that introduction, I think we are ready. So folks, if you want to go ahead and start.
Hi everyone.
It's all yours.
We are looking forward for another webinar, and hopefully it will be interactive as last time, so please feel free to ask questions throughout. This is kind of the agenda for our webinar today. We're going to tell you a little bit about us. Then we'll talk about the objectives from last webinar and this webinar. We'll do a very, very quick review of what the foundation we described last time. And then we kind of dive into the coaching strategy and practical strategy. So I think my name is Hedda. I'm a faculty in special education at the University of Illinois.
I'm Chung. I'm a 4th-year doc student, also in the same special education department.
So let's start. Maria, you want to go ahead and do this one?
I will. So this is our first poll, and our question to you is, how many of you attended the first webinar that we had 2 weeks ago on the foundations of coaching? So if you go to that fourth box under your name, there should be a checkbox in it. Open it up, and you have options of yes or no. And we'll give folks a few 10 seconds or so to finish that up. If you use your polling function, we can tally up the numbers. So make sure you go to that fourth box under your name and click the yes or no button. And we'll give folks another few seconds here. All right. So here is our responses. Let me see if I can't make this just a bit bigger. It looks like a majority of folks were participating on your webinar last 2 weeks ago. A few people not, but.
Okay, yeah, that's great, because we're not going to go over all the foundation that we talked about last week. We're just going to review them very quickly and then starting to talk about the strategy. But if anyone has any question about the foundation that was just going to kind of describe quickly, please do and put it in the chat so we can respond to that. So the objective for the 2 webinars is the importance of engaging family, the foundation for coaching families, the strategy for coaching families, and the strategy for collaborating with families. Last time we covered the first 2 objectives, and today goals or objectives are to really talk about the different strategy and practical kind of tips of how we can coach different families in their natural environment in their homes. So these are the objectives for today.
So in the last week, we reviewed key 7 principles for providing EI service in natural environments, which is emphasizing family involvement and need to support families to be involved by their learning styles and cultural beliefs and practices. And you also highlight the service plan and outcome must be based on families' needs and their priorities.
So these are kind of the principles. Here, I'm going to highlight, you have the website, and this website has the 7 principles with a lot of information and examples about the different principles. So if you're interested, you can go there and find some more information. Something else we covered last time is the DEC family practices. The DEC stands for the Division for Early Childhood. It's part of the Council of Exceptional Children. In 2014, they published the most recent recommended practices handbook. There are 10 recommended practices, or 10 kind of areas. One of the areas is family, and under the family practices there are 3 different topics or themes, and under each one of them there are the practices. Again, this is the website that you can look at and get some more information. The 3 practices, or the 3 themes under the family practices are family-centered practices, where the idea behind them is to look at each family and respect their needs and build the intervention and the IFSP around the family needs, priority, and resources. The second one is the family capacity building practices, and the idea here is to provide family members or caregivers opportunity to participate and learn and build their competence and confidence in using these practices. And the last one is the family and professional collaboration, having a relationship between the family members or caregivers and the providers, and doing through this partnership building the best environment and intervention for the child and the family. So we want to start with kind of a quick question, and I assume, Maria, you're going to put that as a question. We want to see what you think about coaching, what coaching is. Is it evidence-based strategy used with parents, caregiver, and other adults? Build on parents' caregiving existing knowledge? Need to be individualized based on family needs and wants, or all of the above? So if you can take a second, and Maria, I'm going to send that to you.
Put the poll, you will now notice it's the letter A that is under your name, and you click that box, and you should be able to choose from A, B, C, D, or E. So take a 10 seconds or so, and we'll let everybody respond and make their choices. This is one way that we can kind of get an idea of what people are thinking, since we can't actually see you face to face. So we would appreciate it when everybody responds to the polls. It gives us a little bit more information, a little bit more feedback. Give folks a few more seconds to select their answers. I think you're going to be happy with the responses. So let's see here.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a leading question. We were hoping all of you will said all of the above. because coaching is an evidence-based strategy. It's used with caregivers, parents, and other adults, because coaching can use in other situations. It builds on existing knowledge, and it needs to be individualized. So the practices that we talked about and the principle we just described and went through very quickly are some principles that I think most people agree with and understand and believe that these are the practices that should be used. But sometimes people are not sure of how to use them and how to implement them in their own practices, and that's the idea of behind the webinar today. We're going to think about these principles and best recommended practices, how we can take these goals and really implement it in our own practice with family, in the natural environment, within session that we're doing with families on our caseload. So coaching. First of all, I know we talked about it last time, but the idea of coaching is to improve existing practices and develop new skills. Coaching will look very different with different families, and although we're going to talk about principle and we talk about different strategies you can use, you really need to individualize these practices and strategy to each family you're working with. And it could look very, very different for each family. Some family will caregiver will immediately come and sit on the floor with you and play with the kids. Some caregiver will not feel so comfortable in sitting on the floor and playing with the kids. So you might need to adjust some of the coaching and maybe moving to the dinner table and do something with snacks. So you really need to take this strategy and adapt them based on the family needs and resource. The coaching, the definition that we're using are from Rush and Sheldon, and it's an adult learning strategy, something we covered last time, in which the coach promotes the learner's ability to reflect on his or her action. And we're going to talk a lot about reflection today and share with you some of the results from the survey that many of you completed between the two webinars, and think about why reflection is so important within the coaching kind of model. So again, it's the idea behind coaching is to sustain performance and to build competence and confidence with the caregiver. And it could be, again, it's using all the principles we described and individualize them based on each family.
So we would like to show you keywords or sentences posted one at a time, and which may be describing coaching and which may be a myth or misconception about coaching. So by showing each posted, please read and discriminate whether it is about coaching or whether it's not about the coaching. The first is interactive style. Do you think coaching is interactive style or it's not interactive style?
Do you want to do hand raise?
Yeah, let's do a hand raise. So raise your hand if you think that interactive style is a representation of what coaching should be.
Wow. I think we have a decision here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So everyone's saying yes.
The coaching happens based on the interaction. So for us, we will coach caregivers while we are interacting with them, and we will talk more later about the interaction style, which is doing planning, observe, and practice action, reflection, feedback later in the presentation. And the next one. So the next one is the delivery method. Please raise your hand if you think this is the part of the coaching.
Just a few seconds to think that one through.
Yes, can you go to the
Not quite as many responses there.
Mm-hmm. So, the coaching, coaching is more than just a delivery method. So coaching is letting caregivers to reflect on their actions as a means to determine the effectiveness of an actions or practice and develop a plan for refinements and use of the actions in immediate and future situations. So which means it's not just delivering, but it's like more proceeding to interactively and develop and shaping the new skills.
So can I just clarify here? So what you're saying here is that coaching isn't just one style. It's more than just a method of delivering services.
Yeah, it's a practice that we use with all the other practices and strategies that we're using. So you can use coaching with many other approaches for working with families and kids in their homes.
Thanks.
So next one is the provider hands-off.
So go ahead and raise your hand if you think the provider should be hands-off in the coaching, through a coaching process. Nobody's raising their hand.
So this is one of the myths of coaching.
That's good.
That's good.
It's a good sign.
So this is one of the myths of coaching in EI. So coaching caregiver does change the role of the EI provider to support the caregivers and child's interaction from working directly to the child. However, the EI provider will use many different strategies that are designed to help the caregiver learn to engage the child in routines and activities to learn new skills. So in other words, coaching includes demonstration and explanation of various strategies that could be not just like hands-off procedures. Next one is parent empowerment.
So raise your hand if you think that is a representation of what coaching should look like. Parent empowerment. Getting several dings. That's good. Let's see. People are saying yes. People are saying yes, it is.
Yes. The parent empowerment is related with the coaching. So through coaching, EI providers support caregivers to identify and build their personal and family strengths, which is also described in the DC recommended practice. And I think this one had already mentioned in the previous slides. Confidence and competence. The ultimate goal of the coach. Yeah. Yes, so the ultimate goal of the coach is to enhance caregivers' feeling confidence and competence, and this will allow them to engage in self-reflection and generalization of the new skills of strategies to other challenging situations.
So next we want to ask ourselves, is coaching a directive approach or reflective approach? So when we talk about directive, we're thinking about the way we're telling someone what they need to do. Reflective is when we recognize existing skills and knowledge and we reflect on action. So the question is, coaching, is it reflective or is it directive? So if you think it's reflective, please raise your hand.
Lots of dings.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, and we're going to emphasize it throughout, as we're going to emphasize it throughout the webinar today, coaching is very reflective. And it's through reflection we really learn. And I read somewhere it says, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And we're going to emphasize that because this is a really essential component of coaching and teaching and kind of the key for learning. So it is definitely part of the coaching process. When we think about directive, is telling someone what to do. In general, we're going to put directive in the side that it's not coaching. But we need to remember that sometimes we have to be directive. If you think about safety issue or dangerous situation, we do have to tell the parents or the caregiver what to do. So everything here is not black and white, and sometimes we need to move kind of the sticky notes from one side to another. So we've kind of given you the overall idea of, usually when we think about coaching, we think about reflection. we don't think about telling caregiver what to do, but sometimes we will have to tell them what to do, especially if it's a safety or kind of a dangerous situation. Next, let me solve this problem for you. And this could be coming from a service provider, telling the parents or the caregiver, let me solve the problem. Or it could come from the parents or the caregiver saying, solve the problem for me. This is your job, not our job. And the idea here, of course, we're going to move it and we put it on the coaching is not, let me solve this problem for you. And the idea is that our goal is not to solve a problem. We want to provide the caregiver with tools and strategy and practices to sustain changes in both the child and the caregivers. And this is why family involvement is so, so important. We don't, remember that as service provider, we go into the homes 1-2 hours a week, but the parent spends many hours with the child. If we give the parents or the caregiver the tools to practice with the child, the different strategy, and provide the child more opportunity to work on the skills they need to work on, then we're really going to sustain that and improve the competence and the confidence of the parents. So our goal, again, is not to solve a problem, and we should clarify to the parents or the caregiver that we are here to partner with you to work on these skills or these issues. It's not, I'm going to do that, you're going to sit on the side. It's partnership and both sides have to be involved. If anyone has questions, just let us know and we'll go back to that. This is something that we hear from many service providers, that coaching cannot be built. So I'm going to give you the answer first and tell you that coaching can be built. So it's not true to say that coaching cannot be built. And coaching in general, the way you think about it, is the providers are coaching the parents, and it's therapy. It's part of the direct service for the parents and the child. You need to think about the strategy or the practice that the goal is to achieve the IFSP objectives and goals. So if part of that is working with the family and coaching them on how to do different things, it's part of the therapy and it can be built for insurance. So this, I know this is kind of something many people are thinking about, so just know that coaching can be built. And the last one, obviously, involving family and providers, and we talked about it all the time. It's kind of clear that coaching is involving family and provider. It's all about the partnership. Each kind of partner brings some expertise and knowledge to the partnership, and only together we can really work to improve the quality of life and the skills of both the family and the child. So again, these are different things we thought we might want to kind of clarify. We know there are many other kind of myths and other additional beliefs. Always remember, this is not black and white. Sticky notes can move from one side to another sometimes based on the specific situation, but this is kind of the general rules when we think about coaching. So I think we're going to stop for a second and see if anyone has questions about what we discussed so far.
If you have any questions, you can chat them in your chat box and let us know. I haven't seen any questions come through so far, but here we are. We got one that just came in. So Christine asks, what do you do if different caregivers are present for the session, and some are okay with the coaching and reflective style and some are not, or feel that they shouldn't be participating?
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a little bit last time. The idea is that some family member or caregiver will be more hesitant of kind of jumping into the process of coaching. But I think this should be clarified from the beginning when we start services, and explain the expectation of us as service provider of the family, and family needs to be involved. Family should be part of the services. So it could be slowly, and you can start with family member or caregiver just looking, and then slowly involving in the practice. And it's part of the reflection, not just from the part of the caregiver, but also reflection of the side of the service provider. What do I need to do in order to approach this family member from a different perspective and getting them involved? It's a process. Many people will not jump in immediately and start being part of the whole process of the session or the therapy, but it's something that gradually needs to be worked on. And the expectation from the beginning should be clear that families should be involved in the therapy. Any other questions, or should we just continue? Okay, let's move on.
So, Maria, could you make a poll for this one? We have a question. So the question is, who could benefit from coaching? A, providers or caregivers. B, children with disabilities or developmental delay. And C, the service provider, us. Or D, all of the above.
Okay, we think Maria is on her mic or something doesn't work, so we'll take it from here. It looks like there are most of you.
I don't know if I'm still on delay or not, so I'm just going to assume that the poll was offered and finished, and I've just posted the results.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we can see it now. So it seems like everyone who participates thinks that D is all of the above. And this is something that we need to remember, that the coaching is beneficial not just for the child with a disability, but also for the parents and caregiver and for the service provider.
So the first benefit is effective coaching can set up a stage for a lifetime learning on part of the caregiver or parents. And the second, because we are supporting parents and child's interaction, not just us to direct service to the child, innovative ideas from parents can become a useful strategies, and those strategies can be applied all the time, not just in the session.
We also need to remember that one of the benefits, and I just mentioned it, is the positive outcome for children, caregivers, and it should be for service provider. For caregivers, the coaching builds the confidence and the competence, and they have the tools and skills to work with their children in everyday routines. So this is kind of building their competence, empower parents. The children have more opportunity to practice the skills they need to work on. If the parents use it throughout the day, they have more opportunity and can progress quickly on the skill they're working on. And from service provider, when we talk with service provider, they say that they have the reinforcement of knowing that between each session of each home visit, the parent or caregiver is working on these strategy and practices, and they can see changes in the children and the parents. So it's kind of positive outcome from all around for all people involved. We also know that one of the benefits of coaching is enjoyable challenges. There could be many challenging situations when we work with young kids and their families, but the partnership between the service provider and the family could really have the situation shared with other, problem solving, and kind of thinking about how we can solve these challenging situations with the family and the service provider could make it more enjoyable, if we can call it like that.
So to set up a successful relationship with a caregiver or parents for coaching, there are 5 elements that need to be considered. And all 5 elements are also interrelated each other. So first one is trust and mutual respect. So a reasonable level of trust between EI providers and caregivers will happen when each other understand which topic are comfortable discussing and how know the way to approach sensitive topics. And these trust between caregiver and coach will lead to respect each other's professional skills. So there are like few things that shows the evidence of trust and mutual respect between coach and caregivers, such as like develop and share a constant terminology and listen actively, reflectively and empathetically, and express feeling honestly, and understand their partner's levels of concern and comfort, and open to exploring and understanding each other's belief systems. The second element is the cultural reciprocity, which is also related with the first coaching elements, trust and respect. Cultural reciprocity is a means of promoting stronger feeling of empowerment among both families and coach by asking both family members and coaches to introspectively identify own values and beliefs, and then explicitly discuss those values and beliefs with the other person. So the EI providers can engage in culturally reciprocity practice by first identifying their own cultural value and beliefs, and then they can access to the similarities and differences between their values and the values of the families. Then they should acknowledge and respect cultural differences. And finally, they should engage in collaboration with families to provide recommendations that match families' cultural values.
The next one, again, it's the 5 elements for coaching that we need to think about when we think about successful relationship, is the willingness to change. And as a provider, we need to think about sometimes we need to take risks, and sometimes we need to change what we're doing, and it's the same for the family or the caregivers. It's not just changing once, it's changing and learning how to do new skills, approaching things in a different way, and maintaining this. So it's the willingness to change is very important here, because with each family, we're going to work a little bit different, and with each family, we'll need to change a little bit different. So being willing to change and knowing that coaching practice is not one way fit all, one size fit all. It's something that needs to be individualized for each family. It's important for us to think about. The other one is professional attitude. We need to think, we're here to change practices, we need to here to teach strategies, we need to think about improving skills, reflecting, and our goal is we are here to help the family and the child. So we need to think about our professional attitude and how we need to reflect about our own practices and our own strategies we're using and our own beliefs. Many times, most of what we're going to talk about today is how we can help caregiver reflect on their own action and practices. But as a professional, we have to reflect on our own practices, our own beliefs, and it's all related back to the cultural reciprocity and how this affects the relationship within the coaching. And last one is communication, and we know communication is key for every relationship in our life, if it's with our spouse, if it's with our partner, with our kids, with people we work with. Communication is key. We need to listen actively, we need to reflect, and we need to be open to other ideas. So all of these 5 kind of elements needs to be thought of, when we start thinking about coaching. Next, we want to share with you some of the results, and we're going to stop in a second because I see there's some questions. But we just thank you again for those of you who completed the survey we asked to complete between the webinars, and we want to share with you some of the results that we got. So there were 34 service providers who completed the survey. The first question we ask is, what's the highest priority? So we use Rush and Sheldon 14 indicators for coaching, and we can share that again if someone missed that. And we ask you, what are the 3 highest priorities when you think about these indicators? So 50% of the people said, again, it's the highest priority, is to develop a plan for action or practice with the caregiver and provide necessary support to achieve target skill. following coaching. So again, it's the planning, it's the joint planning that we're going to talk about. The second highest one was to acknowledge the caregiver existing knowledge and ability as the foundation for improvement. So people really believe that we need to acknowledge existing skill and build on that to kind of promote other skills. And the highest one that almost 77% of people who completed the survey felt that the highest priority is to interact with caregiver in a non-judgmental and constructive manner. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, because the feedback that we need to provide families and caregivers should be non-judgmental and constructive. So we are very happy to see these are the highest priority that everyone feels should be addressed when we coach caregiver. We also ask, what are the lowest priorities for indicators when coaching caregivers? The lowest priority, which means people don't think they should be use them often, and we're going to share some other data from the survey about how often the people who participate use those. So the first one is provide and promote new information after the reflection. The second one is promote caregiver to reflect. Again, I'm highlighting reflect because we're going to talk a lot about reflection. Promote the caregiver to reflect on his or her knowledge and use the target skills and compare with research-based standards. And the one that people felt should be the lowest priority is ask probing questions to examine the caregiver knowledge and ability. So kind of identify where the caregiver is and what needs to be built on. So these are kind of the results. You can see that all three that were related to the lowest priority, all related to reflection and how we can build on caregiver knowledge and ability. Reflection is difficult. It's not something that's easy to do, so we're going to talk about some tips of how we can address that. So thank you again for those of you who completed that. So now question, and Maria, I think we missed some of the questions. So do you want, can you
Right, we did have a question that came in here in between, and it's from Chelsea, and she wants to know, and I think it's kind of a continuation of the first question is, what if you're working with another therapist who doesn't want the parent back in the room for therapy sessions because they say the child gets too distracted?
Yeah, we heard about this. We know that, and sometimes working with other people who have different beliefs and approach for working with family is very difficult. Again, this is something that should be done outside of the family room when the discussion among the different service providers, but research support, working involving parents, the recommended practice really emphasize the importance of involving parents. And I think using these evidence-based, research-based strategy and the recommended practices should be a rationale for talking with other therapists on the importance of using and involving caregiver as much as possible and providing them the opportunity to learn from, even if you're just working with the child directly, from learning from you as a service provider. So again, I think this discussion should be outside of the family room, between or among service provider, but using these evidence-based practices and recommended practices should kind of be a rationale for why parents or caregivers should be involved in every phase of the intervention or session.
I think so. And I have a follow-up question that I'm actually going to ask, because I know I get asked this a lot in training, and that is, what do you do when it's apparent that there may be another provider who is not only not supporting your process, your own individual process of coaching the families, but basically kind of throwing you under the bus and saying, well, you know, we don't do it that way, this is the way it works. So how would you suggest that providers advocate with the families that their process is meaningful but different?
So how do you advocate? So kind of convincing parents they should be involved? That's what you mean?
When you have two providers that may be coming at different times, and they have two different styles of providing services. One is providing services in a more coaching process, and another is in a more directive, hands-on, one-on-one with the child type process. And oftentimes parents will ask, well, you know, they make me stay, or they'll do this, you know, and they will question the other provider, and the other provider, instead of supporting, will not be supportive and will actually be negative about their peers' coaching.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a continuance from the previous question, and I think this should be dealt with through the coordinator, the case coordinator or something. We know that coaching is best practice. We know we have the evidence for that. We know that some service providers are having a hard time using that. So I think we need to be advocates, as you said, for parents and for kind of our field, and advocate for best services and evidence-based practices and best, you know, recommended practices, and going and communicating with that service provider, and if needed, going through the coordinator, because it can put the family in a really kind of difficult and tricky situation.
Okay, thank you. I know that was a tough question to get through, so I don't see any other questions that have come through, so I think we can probably go forward.
Okay. So next we're going to really talk about practice and strategies. We're using the coaching characteristic from Sheldon and Rush, and they talk about 5 different characteristics: joint planning, observing, action, practice, reflection, and feedback. We're going to spend time on each one of those and talk about specific strategies that can be used.
Before talking about actual strategies, I wanted to share like a summary of our last question in our survey. So the 28 respondents participate in this one, and each 3 sets of the bar graph is a result of each question, and the y-axis is indicating the frequency. The light blue, who rated, is none or some of the time, and the middle blue is who rated about half of the time, and the dark blue is who rated most or all of the time. So as you see in the graph, many respondents rated that they are using a lot of practices related to the joint planning things. And the observation and action practices, like similar to the joint planning, many respondents report that they are using a lot of practices on this too. And in contrast, compared to the previous questions, there are some variation on the question related to the reflection and feedback, and we can see that people reported less using practices related to this too. In the later part of this presentation, we will emphasize the importance of these reflection and feedback. So the first characteristic is the joint planning. So the joint planning occurs for all coaching sessions and involves discussion of what the parents or caregiver agrees to do between coaching interactions, like use of the information that was discussed or the skills that were practices when the coach was present. So the purpose of the joint planning is to ensure that parents or caregivers actually actively participate in the use of the new knowledge and skills that was presented between the coaching sessions. So there is a consideration process when you meet parents and caregivers next time. The first is asking caregiver, was the joint plan effective? So you might want to ask in detail, such as like last time we discussed what you were going to put Johnny in his high chair and offer him 2 choices of food while modeling the word. How was this been going? Like, this will get more clear response rather than just asking how are things going. The next is based on the caregiver's response, you can ask, you can consider why or why not effective and ask to caregivers of that. And then, how do you know it was effective or not effective? Then finally, thinking about the next step. So whether we need to proceed on this planning or need modification or change plan, etc. So you might notice already, but this joint planning thinking procedures is not to be perfection, but to be reflective how plan performed. And to make a good joint planning, these are the criteria that needs to be worked on. So like develop a report with the family and develop a vision for a child and identify the environments and routines and identify child's preference, and these can make like a good joint planning between caregivers and coaches.
One more word about joint planning. We need to remember it's not something we're doing once when we develop the IFSP. It's something that needs to be done at the beginning of each session, at the end of each session. So it's something that's continuously. It's not something we're doing once and never go back to it. We're doing it every session at the beginning and at the end at least.
And second, a coaching character is the observations. So the observing family's daily routine provides an opportunity to access the actions or practice of developing new skills and strategies and ideas. Parents can observe coach to learn new skills and strategies, but also we can observe child and the family. So and consider to self-answer of the questions like, what is caregivers doing? What do you notice about their interactions? How is caregivers approaching these routines? And these answers will provide opportunities for discussion and reflection after the observation. So for example, with the routine of the mealtime, and it is our first time observing this routine, the child is in high chair, and what would be some observation you would make during this routine? It could be about child, like such as how they are eating, like trunk control, like head position and sitting positions for eating, and how they are communicating wanting more food or all done. But also could be about the caregivers or parents. What is caregivers doing, how they are feeding their child, and how they are interacting with their child, and how caregivers are approaching meals routine. The coach can also observe each routine in cultural perspective, because each families have their own culture, and in addition to have conversation with caregiver, observation might be a good source to find out caregiver and family's own culture and apply in their plans and coaching sessions. As I mentioned earlier, you might want caregivers and parents observe you use strategies and ask them to try it. This is the modeling. The key point of modeling is direct caregiver to what to observe and what to observe what the coach is doing. And here are the 7 steps of modeling, and I will tell you one example along with this about how PTs follow the 7 steps of modeling. The child is not sitting. This is for example, child is not sitting, and parents wants to work on the child sitting before mealtime while she's cooking. And PT observed child in high chair, noted that he is so snug and slumped in a chair that he can't move. The first step is explain caregivers what you are going to do. So, for example, a PT can ask parents, how could you give him opportunities to sit and move a little bit and play with toys or finger feeds? And parent might say, I don't know, or maybe like, can we put him on a bit looser or not put the shoulder strap on? And PT might answer like, yes, put just the hip belts would give him a stable base to work from, and he could practice sittings. Then they try it and it works, but it's still too tight. So PT can ask, like, how can we make it still move challenging? And caregivers might say, I don't know. And PT might ask, like, would it be okay if I try moving the tray out? And parents confirm. In this conversation, parents now know that PT is going to do what PT is going to do, and will watch the part of the PT's behavior, which is moving the tray out and make the child practicing sittings. Then tell caregivers what to do during the modeling, and model what to do while they are observing you. Then discuss what works and what did not work. So back to the example, PT move the tray out after parents confirm and parents while observing. Then PT can ask caregiver, how do you think this worked? And caregiver might say, I like this. I can have him practice sitting while I'm cooking and he is safe doing it. Then invite caregivers to try the strategy with the child. So PT can say, okay, I'm going to take him out now and I want you to put him back in. And PT observe parents putting child back in. And PT can ask, how did that work? And this step is step 6, which have a time to reflect what worked and did not work. Then they will have a conversation by asking what are other times during your day and you could practice the sittings, or would this be something you would like to incline you to do, or how will you remember to do this? And parents can participate and practice strategies between now and the next sessions, which is the last step of the modeling, the joint planning. The third coaching characteristic is actions and practice. The practice can happen during the coaching sessions, like I explained in the 7 modeling steps, but also it can happen between the coaching sessions. And to have a good practice, using the source from the natural environment might be better, such as like the food or the bath routine, or like just playing, tickling, and like with the other like home activities.
So we talked about the first 3, and from the survey we did for today, and we used that survey for other purposes too, we found that people feel comfortable with these 3 characteristics. So joint planning, most people doing, then observation, and action and practice, including modeling. So maybe we should take a minute and see some questions that are coming.
Amanda has a question, and she says that she's a behavior therapist, and she's often comes into the situation to deal with tantruming behaviors, like children being told no. But these behaviors don't often occur when she's actually there. The parent will even often comment that the child is much better well behaved or unusually good during the visit. So how do you recommend coaching when the behaviors that you're there to treat you're not observing?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I can think about 2 different ways of doing it. One thing, and we'll mention it in a few slides, is video coaching. So we can ask the parents to video time when the child is having tantrum. Sorry. So we want to, if the child has tantrum, if the parents can videotape the situation, and then the parents and the service provider can watch the video together and think about what happened, how can we set the environment different, how can we teach the child replacement skills, how can we change the consequences, what happened. So one thing is really looking at video, and I know this is something I do a lot with challenging behavior, so we ask parents or caregiver to videotape situation like that, and sometimes we need another person to videotape, and then doing the coaching, really looking at the video and reflecting on what will happen, why it happened, and what we can change in different times. Another way to address that is to structure the environment a little bit. I know we always talk about natural environment and natural routines, but we can structure the environment in a way that, not that I want the child to have challenging behavior, but we can see what happened in a specific situation. So if the child really, really likes a specific toy, and we know every time we take the toy away, he will have some challenging behavior, so we can structure the environment and make sure that the child doesn't have access to that toy since the morning of that day, and then giving the child a toy, and after a few minutes taking it away from him and see what's going on. And this could be kind of a situation where you can kind of structure the environment in a way that has to be, of course, safety, and make sure that the parent's not frustrated, that the caregiver and the child is safe. But you can structure the environment and think about how I can change and manipulate it in the future to prevent challenging behavior or tantrum with young kids. Did this answer your question, Amanda?
Give her, yes. She says yes, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions that have come through yet, so I guess we can go ahead and move forward.
Okay. If you have any other questions throughout, just don't hesitate to put them on, and we'll respond to them as soon as we can. So now we're going to talk about reflection. And as we mentioned many times during the webinar today, reflection is very, very important for any learning. Any learning, you think about yourself every time we reflect of what we experience and what we learn, we understand better what's going on, and the learning is better. So we know that reflection promotes learning. We think we're going to talk mostly about how we can help caregiver reflect on their own action or on knowledge, on understanding, but we always need to remember that as service provider, we have to reflect on our own action, our own practices, and our own beliefs. So when we think about reflection, we need to think about how we're going to ask questions in a reflective way. Question that will promote reflection, and not just question that will be just yes, no, or knowledge. So one way is asking open-ended question. We know that when we ask open-ended question and WH question, we really kind of have a better probability of reflection. If we ask yes or no question or closed-end question, we know that there's limited input from the family or the caregiver. So when you ask question, you really need to think about how I'm going to ask the question, provide opportunity for the caregiver to respond and reflect on what just happened. We also need to think about when we ask the question. We don't just kind of want to ask question at the beginning of the session, at the end of the session. We want to ask question as a response to the parents or caregiver question or comments or action. So something happened during the session, this is the time to ask a question about what happened, how it happened, how can we change that will promote reflection or thinking about that from the parents. We also want to avoid leading question. Again, it's kind of going back to the yes-no question. We want to make sure the question is open as much as possible to allow some reflection from the caregiver. And the idea is not to, we want to really help caregiver problem solve what's going on and understand what happened and what needs to be done. So these are kind of the things that we need to think about when we think about reflection. We also need to be very open. There will be time that the parents will give ideas and suggestions that we know don't match our knowledge of best practices, recommended practices, evidence based practices. So on one side, we need to be open for what parents have ideas to what to do differently. On the other hand, we really need to think how to explain it in a way that the caregiver will understand where we're coming from and what kind of the evidence of what we suggesting that will happen. So be open, but also make sure that we stay in the kind of what we know works. So when we think about reflection, we want to know when we want to reflect. So we just talked about how, kind of using reflection question. We also want to know when we want to reflect. So we can reflect on action, in action, or for action. So we'll talk about each one of them right now. The first one is on action. So we want to think and ask caregiver a question about what the caregiver did to understand what happened in that specific situation. So we want to kind of reflect on something that's already happened. So something after it happens we want to make reflection on. So the type of question we're going to ask is, what just happened? What did you do? How do you think it worked? So reflection of situation or practice that was just used by the caregiver, and kind of providing the opportunity to think and kind of reflect on what happened. Next, we want to think about inaction. When we think about inaction, we were thinking about coaching on the fly or coaching in the moment. And we want to think about coaching during the interaction between the child and the caregiver. So it's possible, we need to make sure that we don't interrupt interaction between caregiver and child, but we want to make sure that we are able to involve within the interaction and help the caregiver reflect on what's going on during that specific interaction. So a question that we might want to ask, what is happening right now? What can you try now? What could you be doing differently right now? So this is, again, in the moment that something's going on. It's not something that happened in the past, it's something that's going on right now. So that's what we call about reflection in action. And the last kind of opportunity to do reflection is for action, so kind of planning. When we plan about reflection, or we plan some situation, or we plan the use of a specific strategy or practice, we want to think about what can we do in the future. So this is kind of before the situation just happened. So a question we want to ask ourselves, what are you going to do next time? What do you plan to do similar or differently in the future? So again, this is planning for the next time in that specific situation. What am I going to do differently? Going back to the example with the challenging behavior of the child, if we have a video, we can think about, it's hard for us to do in-action reflection, but we can do on-action reflection, which means what happened during that time, what did I do, what did the child do, and also reflection for action. What am I going to do next time in the same situation? So think about when we're going to reflect. We also want to think about what we are reflecting on. So think about the content of the reflection question. We talked about type of reflection question. We talked about when we want to reflect, and now we want to think about when, what are we going to reflect about. So the first thing we want to think about is reflection related to knowledge and understanding. So we want to have the caregiver think about what she or he already know about specific topic or about specific practice, and kind of asking, what do you know? What do you know about these practices? What do you know about using this strategy? What's your knowledge about challenging behavior? Do you know the connection between antecedent, what happened before the behavior, and the consequences, what happened after the behavior? So kind of understanding and helping the caregiver reflect on what the knowledge he or she has. We also want to think about reflection for practice. So think about what happened now, and what I need to understand what just happened and what things in that specific situation I need to change. So this is question, reflection related to the specific practice or strategy the caregiver just used. We also want to think about the outcomes, so reflection related to outcomes. What does the caregiver think about the outcome of the use of the practice they just used, and what do they think about the outcomes related to the desired outcome that the parent hoped for or the caregiver hoped for. So we think about knowledge, practice, outcome, and we also want to think about questions related to evaluation, kind of asking caregiver to make a judgment or evaluate what they know currently, what they need to learn more or improve on for related to skill or practices. So these are kind of the different content that we want to look at.
Here for just a second. Here's a question that I think is a clarifying question that probably we should ask at this moment.
Yeah.
So Tanya wants to know, when you're talking about the reflection, are we reflecting on our own behaviors, or of the team, or of the parent and provider?
So we're talking about both. We're talking about, so the stuff we just talked about, we talk about how as service provider we can promote reflections from the caregiver. So all the stuff that I just mentioned is when I'm going to stop a second, help the caregiver think about what just happened, what am I going to do different. So reflection of the caregiver on his or her own practice and knowledge. But as service provider and as a team member, we have to reflect on our own behavior. And the same principle of on, in, or for could be used for us as service provider. We need to think about what we're going to do when we go into the home visit and how we're going to coach the parents. During the visit, no one will ask us questions for reflection, but we need to stop for a second sometimes and think about, did I ask this question correctly? Did I use the right language? Did I use the right tone? And then, of course, after we leave the home, we reflect on what just happened and what did I did well and what did I might need to change next time I come to the home. Did this answer the question, Tanya?
Please typing, so we'll see. Yes. She says thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I always think that all these practices, we're talking about how we coach parents and how we use reflection in our coaching, but all of this should go to us as providers, and we always need to think about how are we doing and what we need to change and what my knowledge is and what do I need to learn and improve when we think about that. So we talked about joint planning, observation, action, practice, reflection, and feedback. And reflection and feedback are very connected to each other, and we always need to think about any feedback should come after reflection, before reflection, when are we exactly going to do the feedback. So feedback can be done in different ways, and it's important to remember that feedback is not always negative. We actually always should start with positive feedback. What went well? What did you do well? How things happen and the child improve, or you as a caregiver improve. So feedback should be both positive, what went well, but also what needs to have some adjustment in the future. But remember kind of finding the balance. I always have more positive than negatives, because we want this to be a positive experience for the caregiver. We want to make sure that the rapport that we built with the family, the kind of the atmosphere of partnership is staying there. So we really need to be careful of how we're providing feedback, and think about really think about how we do it in a way that not in a judgmental way, in a way that will help build on caregiver knowledge and skills, and not making them feel not comfortable with what's going on. So feedback. So let's ask you a question, and Maria, maybe you can.
So their question to everyone is, when do you provide this feedback? A, when the parent and caregiver is interacting with the child. B, at the end of the session. C, after I leave the home through email or phone calls. Or D, all of the above. So you can open up that polling function, that fourth box under your name, and select your responses. And we'll give folks a little bit of time to do that here. Give folks a little bit more time as we see a few more responses coming in. Okay, let me just post this up here real quick, and there you go. So the majority of folks responded with the answer of D, all of the above.
Yeah, and again, we're very glad to see that people are using different ways of communicating and providing feedback. It's important to use different modes of communicating with parents and providing feedback. Different people have will accept different feedback in a different way, in a different mode. So we really need to think about what works best for the family we're working on. So when we're thinking about types of feedback, we're looking kind of at two dimensions. We're looking at real time and we're looking at delay feedback. We're also looking at another dimension, and it is verbal or other ways of mode of communication. So you can think about these two dimensions, really think about how we can use that when we provide feedback to family. So when we think about the time dimension, we can do it during the session, so while parent and child interaction or caregiver-child interaction, or after the session, at the end, before we leave the home. So, and of course we can do both. When we think about, so this is kind of after a session, if you have a few minutes, you can talk with the caregiver and provide feedback. Of course, it always needs to start with the reflection. What did you think went well? What would you change? And then provide the feedback that you want to do. When we think about the kind of the other dimension of verbal versus other, it could be written feedback. Some providers leave notes when they leave the home and leave their family or caregiver a chance to read their feedback. This could also be delayed feedback, and it could be via email or via video feedback. So we mentioned a little bit via feedback in a few slides ago when we had the question about the challenging behavior. We learned, and research shows that parents really, really, really appreciate video feedback. Seeing what they're doing well and what might they need to make some adjustments. So kind of finding a video clipping, short video clip, doing that and bringing it to the session and looking at your iPhone or your iPad and showing the caregiver what was going on, kind of promoting their confidence that they're doing stuff right. So this is something that could be done too within the coaching on the home visit. So these are kind of the types of feedback. I know we have only a few more minutes, so I'm going to go faster on this one. Oh, okay. So feedback. We're going back to feedback. We're again thinking about feedback. So we think about when we provide feedback, what type of feedback we provide, how we provide feedback in different ways, delay, on time when we're there. We also need to think about what is effective feedback. So effective feedback have few characteristics that we always need to think about when we talk with our caregivers. The first one is that our feedback needs to be grounded in data, which means it's not something we feel or think about, it's something that we observe and have data on. Different families will look at it differently. Some families will want to see the data. They will want to see graphs, and they will want to see numbers, and they will want to see exactly how the child is improving and how the caregiver is using the strategy correctly. Some families, we don't want to see the real data, but every feedback that we provide to family needs to be grounded in data. It's not our feeling, not our thoughts, it's not our belief, it's what we saw based on our observation and the data that we collected. So always remember that effective feedback is grounded in data. And I know data is something that with all the paperwork sometimes it's frustrating, but we have to think about data or what we observe in order to provide effective feedback. We also need to think about how specific the feedback is. Sometimes if we say, oh, you did so well today, or something like that, it's very broad. Or you need to change the way you work with your child or the way you play with your child. It's very, very broad. In order to be effective, we need to be very, very specific. I saw that you gave the toy with the child and signed while you did that. I saw that you gave the child choices. So be very specific about, again, the ground in data, so what I observed and what you did well and what you might want to change. So be very specific about how you can make adjustment to that specific situation that we just did and I observed. The feedback also needs to be constructive. So, as I just mentioned before, it has to be very positive. It has to be, you don't want to judge the caregiver about anything. You want to make sure that you are positive and you talk about what was done correctly and what might need to be adjustment. And using the caregiver reflection in order to build this positive and knowing that it's coming from the caregiver and it could be used to kind of make changes in the future. So again, grounded in data, specific, constructive, and the last one is supportive. So we really want to support and encourage the family. Our goal, again, throughout the coaching process is to build competence and confidence in the parents. We want to empower parents and give them the tools to be able to provide learning opportunity for their kids in the natural environment in everyday routine. So we have to be supportive, and it's again going back to building rapport and building partnership and thinking about what the caregiver is doing well and how we can adjust and build on that knowledge and skills that the parents or caregiver already have in order to make changes to promote child's learning and development. So again, these are the, when we think about positive, effective feedback, always think about the data that we're doing, the specific, we're giving feedback that is specific and not broad, so the caregiver know exactly what needs to be changed and not just think about what we're trying to say. We need to be constructive and very positive, think about not just what's not going well, but what's going well, and supporting and building this partnership and the rapport with the family we're working with. So, final thoughts and maybe kind of opportunity for asking a few more questions. So we kind of talked about different strategies and practices. We really focus on the characteristic from Rush and Sheldon for coaching. We talk about joint planning that needs to be done before the beginning or the end of each session. We talk about how much we can learn from observing parent-child interaction or caregiver-child interaction. We don't just learn about the knowledge and skills the caregiver has, we also can learn about the culture and practices that's going on in the family. We talked about action and practice, including modeling, how we can model how to use different strategy with the child, and how we can involve the caregiver slowly into the coaching and making sure that the caregiver is first observing, then practicing, and then getting some feedback. Reflection is something we mention and emphasize throughout the webinar. It's not easy to do. Sometimes it's painful to do, but it's something we have to do. Learning is really, reflection is really necessary for learning. So we really need to think about how we help caregiver reflect on their own action and skills and knowledge, and how we as providers reflect on our own knowledge and skills and practices. So reflection is something that's necessary, and sometimes, as we saw in the survey and in other surveys that we did, sometimes people don't think this is an important kind of component or characteristic of any interaction, and we really want to emphasize that this is something that has to be done and is important to be done. And it could be done throughout the session, before something happened, during something happened, after something happened, but it has to be in a positive way. And lastly, the feedback and how feedback has to be positive and constructive, and really think about when we give in feedback, how we give in feedback, and how we kind of keep the whole thing as a supportive and positive relation and partnership between family and caregivers and service providers. So I think some of the comments in the survey that some of you completed were asking about showing videos, and we cannot use videos for these webinars because it's so big and some technology issues. So we wanted to include that and make sure that you have these resources. There's some really good video example of coaching, different type of videos, coaching with the family, coaching coach. There's an online module by the Texas. They developed these modules, and it's really very comprehensive, includes a lot of information. And there's other, some people ask us about the coaching checklist and how you can self-assess your own coaching using the coaching indicators that we talked about them. So these are kind of other resources, but we'll be happy to share more if anyone is interested. I wonder if there's any other questions that we'll be happy to answer.
I'm not seeing any other questions. I did just post again the link to the handouts, so if you didn't have them, that is the link, and that's where you can get those video examples that they've just talked about. I don't see any questions. I do want to thank both of you for a very informative webinar. Lots of things to think about, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. For everyone else, just a reminder that you will be getting an email from the training program that has that link in there, so make sure you complete that survey in that email, and then your certificate will be emailed back to you within about 24 hours. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for your participation. I think be on the lookout for other webinars that we're going to be having, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be happy to answer any questions, so feel free to contact us, and we can provide more resources or answer questions that you have. Thanks.